Mark had always loved the quiet, uneventful life that his suburban neighborhood provided. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved to each other, children played on the sidewalks, and the hum of daily routines filled the air. But that was before Karen moved in. It was early summer when the large moving truck pulled into the house next door. Karen, with her sharply manicured nails, designer sunglasses, and a posture that screamed entitlement, emerged from the vehicle. She looked like she belonged in a penthouse, not a suburban street. Her arrival was like the calm before a storm, outwardly serene, but Mark could already feel the tension in the air. The first encounter happened on a hot, sunny afternoon. Mark was in his driveway, meticulously waxing the hood of his vintage muscle car, a machine that had taken years to restore. It was his pride and joy, something he'd poured countless hours into. The engine purred with power, the chrome gleamed in the sunlight, and Mark couldn't help but admire the result of his hard work. It was a masterpiece, a tangible piece of his soul. Then, without warning, he heard footsteps approaching. Mark glanced up to see Karen walking toward him, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She stopped a few feet away, sizing him up with an expression that was more judgmental than welcoming. "Nice car," she said, her tone almost mocking, like she was speaking to someone beneath her. "But I'm afraid it doesn't quite fit the neighborhood vibe." Mark raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep things neutral. The car was his pride, and he wasn't about to let anyone talk down about it, especially not a stranger. Karen gave him a slow, deliberate look, her lips curling into a tight smile. "Well, you see, it's just a little too loud. And frankly, it looks like an eyesore in front of such a nice neighborhood. It's really dragging down the property values." Mark stood up, wiping his hands on a rag, his patience wearing thin. "My car's perfectly legal," he replied firmly. "It's not causing any problems." "Oh, but it is," Karen insisted, her voice growing sharper. "I can't tell you how many complaints I've already received. People are unhappy, and they're just too polite to say anything to you directly." She paused, her smile growing ever colder. "I'm just being the good neighbor by telling you what everyone else is too scared to say." Mark couldn't believe what he was hearing. Was she really blaming his car for something as ridiculous as property values? His neighborhood, once peaceful, was becoming a battleground. And he was being drawn into it by this woman who seemed to think she had the power to control everyone around her. "Listen," Karen continued, her eyes narrowing, "I'm going to have to escalate this if you don't do something about it. I've already contacted the HOA. They'll take care of it, don't worry." She turned on her heel and walked away, her words hanging in the air like a dark omen. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he stood frozen, staring at the space where Karen had been just moments before. Was she really going to go that far? This wasn't just a harmless complaint anymore. The threat was real. Karen had made it clear she wasn't going to stop until his car was gone. As he stood there, the oppressive weight of her words settling over him, Mark realized that something had shifted. The calm suburban life he had once known was now a ticking time bomb, and he had no idea how far Karen was willing to go to get what she wanted. But one thing was certain: he wasn't going to back down, not without a fight. And little did Mark know, this would be the beginning of a much darker, more dangerous game than he could have ever anticipated. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted the moment Karen left his driveway that day. The threat she'd made had settled in his chest like a stone, heavy and unshakable. He wasn't about to let anyone, especially a self-righteous newcomer, tell him what to do with his car. But the next few days proved that Karen wasn't the type to back down easily. No, she was just getting started. The first warning sign came the very next morning. Mark awoke to the harsh sound of a knock at his door. Groggy, he stumbled downstairs, opening the door to find an envelope with a neatly printed letter inside. It was from the Homeowners Association, informing him that a formal complaint had been filed against him for the condition of his car. The letter stated that his vehicle was disrupting the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood and must be removed immediately, or he'd face a fine and potential legal action. The HOA had given him a mere 2 days to comply. The letter was unsigned, but Mark didn't have to look far to figure out who was behind it. He could almost hear Karen's smug voice in his head, echoing her words from their last conversation. "I've already contacted the HOA," she had said, her eyes glinting with self-righteousness. "They'll take care of it, don't worry." The audacity, the sheer boldness of it made Mark's blood boil. He knew Karen had been working behind the scenes, using her influence to try and bully him into submission. But this was war. He immediately called the HOA office, demanding an explanation. The woman on the other end of the phone was polite but firm, stating that they were simply following up on a complaint and that they were under pressure to resolve it quickly. Mark's gut twisted as he realized Karen's hands were all over this. Her grip on the neighborhood was far tighter than he had imagined. The next day, Mark found another surprise. A second letter arrived, this time from the city, an official warning about his car's loud engine noise, disturbing the peace. The letter detailed several alleged complaints from concerned residents and threatened that if he didn't take immediate action, they would call in the local authorities to handle the issue. He couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Loud engine noise. His car wasn't any louder than a dozen others on the street, and it was certainly quieter than Karen's obnoxious SUV. But somehow, she had managed to spin the narrative in her favor. It was becoming clear that Karen was using every trick in the book to take him down. She wasn't going to just let him be. She was playing the long game, wearing him down with her persistence. Mark had underestimated her, but no more. He couldn't let her control his life like this, couldn't let her win without a fight. The stakes had gotten higher. And if Karen thought she was going to crush him, she had another thing coming. Days passed, and the harassment continued. The HOA's threats grew more severe, with fines looming larger. Neighbors began giving him nervous, sidelong glances whenever they passed by. Mark wasn't sure if they were scared of Karen's wrath or just tired of hearing about his ongoing feud with her, but the quiet murmurs and whispered conversations had become impossible to ignore. He was becoming the target of their gossip, the outcast in a neighborhood that used to feel like home. Mark spent every night thinking of ways to fight back. But as the hours ticked by, one thing became clear. He couldn't just sit there and let Karen win. He had to do something. Anything. And just when he thought he couldn't take it anymore, that's when things took a dangerous turn. Late one evening, after a long, frustrating day filled with more phone calls and emails, Mark was outside working on his car. The engine was giving him trouble, and he had hoped to fix it before Karen's latest complaint reached the HOA. That's when he heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling up in front of his house. He looked up, expecting to see Karen, but what he saw stopped him cold. Her black SUV, parked right in front of his driveway. But this time, Karen wasn't in the driver's seat. Someone else was, and they were watching him with an intense, unsettling stare. Mark's heart skipped a beat. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The games had just begun, and Mark had no idea what Karen was truly capable of. The air was thick with tension as Mark stood frozen in his driveway, his eyes locked on the mysterious figure sitting behind the wheel of Karen's SUV. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stared back at him with an intensity that sent chills crawling down his spine. The setting sun cast long shadows over the street, and for a moment, it felt like the world was holding its breath. Mark's pulse raced. He took a step forward, heart hammering in his chest, but the stranger didn't make a move. The silence was deafening, almost suffocating. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger than a petty neighborhood dispute was unfolding right before his eyes. The SUV's engine rumbled faintly, and the figure finally shifted, turning the ignition off. The stranger didn't step out, though. They just sat there, motionless, as if waiting for something. Waiting for him. His instincts screamed at him to retreat, to call the police, but something rooted him in place. What if this was the moment he'd been dreading? What if Karen had gone too far, brought someone in to intimidate him, or worse, to force him into submission? The figure in the SUV raised a hand to the window and rolled it down slowly. A smooth, cold voice emerged. "You're Mark, right?" Mark's blood ran cold. He nodded, cautiously, trying to maintain control of the situation. "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, they leaned forward, their face emerging from the shadows. It was a man in his mid-30s, with short, dark hair and a hard gaze that made Mark's stomach tighten. He was dressed in a black suit, too formal for this neighborhood, too deliberate. The man exuded authority, and there was something chilling in the way he observed Mark, as if he were studying him like prey. "I'm here on behalf of Karen," the man said, his lips curling slightly. "She sent me to handle a situation." His words were calculated, as if he were measuring each one to ensure maximum effect. Mark's skin prickled with unease. What kind of situation? He knew Karen was ruthless, but this felt like something entirely different. The man's eyes narrowed, as though he could see right through Mark's calm facade. "Let's just say Karen doesn't take kindly to resistance. She's very determined to have things her way. And if you don't do as she asks, there will be consequences." A cold wave of realization hit Mark. This wasn't just about his car anymore. This was a game of power, and Karen wasn't playing by the same rules he was. He was in over his head. "Listen, I'm not going to get rid of my car," Mark said, his voice firm, though his heart raced. He had to stand his ground. "I've done nothing wrong." The man's lips twitched upward in a semblance of a smile, an unsettling one. "You may think you're in control, but things don't work like that around here. You'll see. Trust me, this isn't a fight you want to make personal." With that, the man shifted the SUV into gear and sped off, leaving Mark standing there, dumbfounded, as the last rays of daylight vanished behind the looming trees. But it wasn't over. Far from it. Mark didn't have time to process what had just happened. His mind was still racing, trying to make sense of the cryptic warning and the chill in the man's words. Was this some kind of intimidation tactic? Or was it a sign that Karen's reach extended far beyond what he had imagined? As he stood there, lost in thought, Mark suddenly realized that something else was amiss. His car, his precious muscle car, which he had been working on just moments ago, was gone. His eyes darted to the street. It wasn't in the driveway, not in front of his house. Gone. Panic surged in his chest. He spun around, looking for any sign of it. Had someone stolen it? No, it was worse. Much worse. As his gaze swept the street, his heart sank. He could just make out the distant silhouette of his car being towed away, driven by the same man who had just left him standing there, speechless. His vintage car, the one he had lovingly restored, was being dragged away in the night, swallowed by the darkness. Mark's stomach twisted in a knot. This wasn't just a fight for a car anymore. This was something far more sinister. Karen had played her hand, and Mark realized, too late, that he was in the center of a dangerous game. And it was only just beginning. Mark's mind raced as he watched his car disappear into the distance, the tow truck's taillights flickering like the fading heartbeat of his former life. His breath hitched in his chest. He couldn't believe it. Karen had somehow orchestrated this. In the blink of an eye, his prized possession was being hauled away, and all he could do was stand there, helpless, watching it slip through his fingers. But his shock quickly turned to fury. No one, not even someone as manipulative as Karen, had the right to do this. His thoughts were a blur of rage, but one thing was clear. He was done being a passive victim in her twisted little game. He grabbed his phone, dialing the number for the towing company with shaking hands. He could feel the tension in the pit of his stomach as the phone rang, each passing second amplifying his sense of urgency. When the line clicked open, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "What the hell is going on?" Mark demanded. "I need my car back right now." "You took the wrong one. This is a mistake." The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. "Sir, we're just following orders. The car was towed for." "I don't care what you were told," Mark interrupted, his voice rising. "That car was mine, and I'm not going to let some stranger steal it." The line went quiet for a moment, and then the voice spoke again, slower this time. "Your car was towed under city ordinance, sir. You should have received a notice. If you'd like, you can meet us at the impound lot to retrieve it." Impound lot. Mark's heart sank as the words settled in. Karen. It had to be her. She had orchestrated this entire thing, using her connections, her influence, to manipulate the situation in her favor. This wasn't about his car anymore. This was a power play, one that had gone beyond petty complaints and veered into something far darker. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car engine roaring up the street. He turned just in time to see Karen's SUV screech to a halt in front of his house. He felt a knot tighten in his throat. She was here, no doubt, to finish what she had started. But this time, Mark wasn't going to back down. Karen stepped out of the vehicle, her expression as smug as ever, a satisfied grin playing at the corners of her lips. "I see you've figured it out," she said, her voice dripping with malice. Mark clenched his fists, taking a step toward her. "You think you can just take my car and get away with it? This isn't over, Karen." She shrugged, unbothered, almost amused. "Oh, but it is. You see, Mark, the neighborhood doesn't appreciate your little eyesore of a car. It's a distraction, and I'm just making sure things are right around here." Mark's eyes narrowed, his mind racing with the implications of her words. She wasn't just talking about the car. She was talking about him. His existence, his place in this neighborhood, was being dictated by her. She was making him the villain, and she had the entire neighborhood backing her, whether they knew it or not. "You think you've won." Mark's voice was cold, a deep, simmering fury just beneath the surface. "You've made a mistake, Karen. You're not dealing with some passive neighbor who'll roll over. I'm done letting you control my life." Karen's smile faltered for just a second, a flicker of doubt crossing her face before she quickly masked it. "You don't know what you're up against. You never did. But don't worry. You'll learn soon enough." She turned on her heel and walked toward the SUV, but not before tossing one last chilling glance over her shoulder. "Just don't make it personal, Mark. It won't end well for you." Mark stood there, watching her leave. His heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline surging through his veins. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. With grim determination, Mark stormed inside and grabbed his keys. He wasn't about to let Karen win. If she thought she could control him with her threats and manipulation, she had another thing coming. He wasn't going to sit idly by while his life and his property were taken from him. He slammed the door behind him and sped off in the direction of the impound lot. His car was there, and he was going to get it back, no matter what. The game had just taken a dangerous turn, and Mark was ready to play by his own rules. And when he arrived at the impound lot, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a battle for a car. It was a fight for his freedom. And he wasn't going to let anyone take that from him. Mark's knuckles tightened around the steering wheel as he sped toward the impound lot. Every turn he made felt like a step closer to a final confrontation. His thoughts swirled with frustration, anger, and a growing sense of urgency. Karen had crossed a line. His car was just the beginning. This had become personal. As he neared the lot, his headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of vehicles trapped behind chain-link fences and towering gates. The lot looked like a graveyard for cars. Dirty, abandoned, forgotten. But not his car. No, his car wasn't going to sit here, tucked away like a piece of trash. Not if he had anything to say about it. He pulled up to the entrance, only to be met by a rusty gate with a chain wrapped tightly around it. The guard shack was dark, the silence oppressive. Mark felt the familiar weight of unease settle in his chest. Something didn't feel right. He parked his car at the entrance and got out, walking toward the shack. The lot was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the distant hum of the city. But there was something off, something lurking in the air, just beyond the edge of his awareness. He could feel it in his bones. He knocked on the shack's door, a sound echoing across the lot. For a moment, there was no response. Then, the door creaked open, revealing a scruffy man in his 40s, his eyes bloodshot and tired. His uniform was faded, and his stubble hinted at days without shaving. Mark was immediately suspicious. "What do you want?" the man asked, his voice thick with disinterest. "I'm here to pick up my car," Mark said, his voice sharp. It was Todd. "I called earlier." The man squinted at him, scanning his face as if trying to gauge whether Mark was telling the truth. After what felt like an eternity, he grunted and nodded toward a set of metal doors in the back of the shack. "Go around back," the guard said. "It's there." Mark felt a knot form in his stomach. Something didn't sit right about this. Why wasn't the car in the lot, where it was supposed to be? Why the secrecy? The guard's offhand response only heightened his suspicions. He didn't question the man any further. Mark made his way around the back, his footsteps slow and deliberate. The cold air seemed to bite at him more sharply as he approached a small, dimly lit building at the edge of the lot. Through the cracks in the walls, he could see shadows moving inside, figures shifting, watching. As he reached the door, a voice inside called out, "You, Mark." It was a deep, gravelly tone, nothing welcoming about it. He didn't answer immediately, instead taking in the scene. The building felt wrong, like something out of a nightmare. The floor was slick with oil, and several cars sat in various states of disrepair. But it wasn't the cars that made Mark's heart race. It was the feeling of being trapped, cornered, like he was being pulled into something much darker than a simple impound lot. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice steady despite the dread curling in his chest. "I'm here for my car." The man inside chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. The door creaked open, revealing a figure Mark hadn't expected, someone he recognized, but only barely. It was the same man from Karen's SUV, the one who had given him that chilling morning just days before. "I see you decided to show up," the man said, his smile cold, cruel. "You must really love that car." Mark's mind spun as the realization hit him. This wasn't just a battle for his car anymore. Karen's reach had stretched far deeper than he had ever imagined. He wasn't dealing with an impound lot or a simple towing company. This was part of her twisted plan. This man was just another piece of the puzzle she was orchestrating. "I'm not leaving without it," Mark said, trying to keep his voice even, but his eyes never left the man. He could feel the danger creeping closer, the walls closing in. "Oh, you'll leave all right," the man replied, his tone growing darker. "But it won't be with your car." Before Mark could react, the door slammed shut behind him with a loud crash. He whipped around, but it was too late. Two more men emerged from the shadows, blocking his path. Their eyes were cold, calculating. They didn't need to speak. The intent was clear. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as panic surged through him. He had walked right into a trap. The stakes had gone far beyond a car. He was now caught in the snare of Karen's silent war, and there was no way out. "Now," the first man said, his voice low and threatening, "let's see just how far you're willing to go to play hero." Mark's mind raced for an escape, but every instinct screamed that he was running out of time. He had no choice now but to play along. But how far would he go before it was too late to turn back? The trap had snapped shut. Mark's pulse was a steady drumbeat in his ears, the rising fear threatening to cloud his judgment. The men who now surrounded him were not just strangers. They were the harbingers of Karen's twisted plans, and they knew exactly what they were doing. The air around him seemed to thicken with the weight of impending danger, as though the very atmosphere was closing in, suffocating him. "Move," the first man ordered, his voice low and dangerous. Mark's eyes darted between the two men blocking the door and the man who had been waiting inside the building. They all stood with the calm confidence of people who had already won. They were in control. Mark's mind raced, but there was no clear way out. The back door, his only escape route, was blocked. The front door, too, was sealed shut. His only choice was to move forward, to press them, but that was a gamble he wasn't sure he was ready to take. "Why are you doing this?" Mark demanded, trying to buy himself some time. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was desperate. He needed answers. What does Karen want? Why go this far over a car? The first man didn't flinch. His face remained cold, impassive. "Karen doesn't want your car, Mark. She's past that. She's testing you. You think you've been fighting over a car. No, you've been fighting over control." Mark's breath caught in his throat. He had known Karen was manipulative, but he hadn't realized just how deep her web of control extended. His entire life had been dragged into this mess, and now it seemed like there was no way to escape her grasp. The second man stepped forward, blocking the small window of light between them. His posture was menacing, his eyes dark as he spoke. "She wants to see how far you'll go to protect what's yours. She wants to see if you'll sacrifice everything for a car." "Everything?" Mark echoed, his voice rising despite his fear. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You don't know me. I'm not going to let her walk all over me. I'll fight for what's mine." The man smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. It was a smile of someone who knew the game was already over. "You don't get it, do you? You've already lost. She's already won. You think she's just a neighbor with a vendetta. No, she's playing a much bigger game. And you're a pawn." Mark's stomach twisted into a knot. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet were rooted to the spot. The door behind him was still blocked by the men, and the weight of their presence was like a suffocating fog. Karen's game had turned into a nightmare, one that he wasn't sure he could escape from. He needed to think, but the pressure was mounting. The realization was dawning on him. He was being pushed into a corner, and every move he made was part of her plan. If he left now, if he tried to fight back, it would only prove her point. He would lose by doing exactly what she wanted him to. There was no easy way out. A thought crossed Mark's mind. A single fleeting possibility. He could turn the tables. He could find a way to use Karen's own rules against her. The thought was wild, risky, dangerous, but it was the only thing left to him. He wasn't going down without a fight. Not this time. Taking a deep breath, Mark locked eyes with the first man, his voice steady despite the thudding of his heart. "You're right. Karen's already won. But I'm not going to let her finish the game. I'm not going to be your pawn. Not anymore." The men looked at each other, exchanging a brief glance. Mark could see the uncertainty flicker in their eyes, just for a moment. Had he shaken them? Or were they simply waiting for the inevitable? The first man took a step closer, and for a split second, Mark thought he might be in for a physical confrontation. But instead, the man's lips curled into a twisted smirk. "We'll see how far you're willing to go, Mark," the man said, his voice cold and low. "Because Karen's already made sure there's no escape." As the words sank in, Mark felt the last sliver of control slip away, replaced by a cold realization. He had underestimated Karen. She had orchestrated this entire situation, calculated every step. But she hadn't accounted for one thing, his refusal to be controlled. He had just one choice left, to take the game to a whole new level. The trap had closed around him, but Mark was about to turn it on its head. It was time for the real fight to begin. Mark's heart pounded in his chest, the walls of the small, dimly lit building seeming to close in on him with each passing second. He knew he was out of time. The men around him had no intention of letting him leave unscathed, and Karen's twisted game had reached a critical point. But in that moment, with fear and adrenaline surging through him, Mark realized something. The only way out of this was to break the rules. The man with the cold smile took another step toward him, his heavy boots echoing on the concrete floor. The other two men flanked Mark, their expressions unreadable, their movements predatory. But Mark's mind was elsewhere. In his desperation, an idea flickered into his mind, a daring, dangerous idea. He couldn't be passive any longer. He had to take control, even if it meant risking everything. His hands twitched at his sides. He felt the hard metal of his car keys in his pocket. It was a simple thing, a key, but it could become his weapon in a world that seemed determined to strip him of everything he held dear. If he was going to survive this, if he was going to win, he needed to outthink them, outmaneuver them. The first man came to a halt just inches away from him. Mark's muscles tensed, every nerve on high alert. The man's hand was close to his pocket, his posture too confident, too cocky. Mark knew the moment he tried anything, he'd be overwhelmed. But there was one thing the man didn't expect. Without warning, Mark lunged forward, his body a blur of motion. The first man barely had time to react before Mark grabbed the man's arm, twisting it behind his back with all the force he could muster. There was a sharp gasp from the men around him, but Mark didn't stop. He used the man's body as a shield, pulling him close, the gun Mark hadn't noticed earlier pressed against Mark's chest. "Let him go," the second man shouted, but Mark ignored him. This was the moment, his chance to finally turn the tables. Mark's heart hammered in his chest, but his focus was razor sharp. With a grunt of effort, he shoved the man forward, knocking him off balance, and before anyone could react, he spun to face the remaining men. His hand shot to his pocket, feeling the cold steel of the keys beneath his fingers. With a swift motion, he flicked the alarm button. The sharp beeping of the car's alarm echoed through the lot, loud and deafening. For a split second, everyone froze, eyes locked on Mark as the car's headlights blinked to life, the engine roaring as though it were alive, ready to pounce. "Your move," Mark spat, his voice low, steady with the adrenaline coursing through him. The second man, now visibly rattled, made a half-hearted attempt to grab him, but Mark was already moving. He bolted for the door. The men were too slow to stop him, too disoriented by the sudden chaos of the alarm blaring. Mark pushed through the door, the cold night air slapping his face as he dashed for the fence lining the impound lot. Behind him, he could hear the sound of footsteps pounding in pursuit, but it didn't matter. His car was just ahead, waiting for him like a loyal ally in the chaos of battle. He was so close to freedom. He didn't stop running. He didn't slow down. In one swift motion, Mark was at the car, slamming his hand down on the door handle, pulling it open. His heart raced as he slid into the driver's seat, slamming the door behind him just as the first man appeared at the fence, shouting. Mark's foot hit the pedal before the man could react, the engine roaring to life with a growl that vibrated through his bones. The tires screeched against the gravel, the car jerking forward with a surge of speed. The impound lot faded behind him as he sped down the darkened street, the bright lights of the city blinking in the distance. But the danger wasn't over. Mark knew that Karen wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. She had set the stage for this showdown, but she wouldn't let him slip away so easily. As he drove, Mark's mind raced, formulating his next move. This wasn't just about getting his car back. It was about something far more important. His life, his freedom. Karen had made one fatal mistake. She had underestimated him. The game wasn't over. Not yet. But now Mark had the upper hand. And this time, he wasn't going to back down. Not until he took back everything she had tried to take from him. Mark's knuckles gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his hands were beginning to shake. The car tore through the streets with the speed of desperation, the screech of tires still ringing in his ears from the impound lot. His chest was tight with a mixture of adrenaline and dread. The worst part was knowing that even though he'd escaped, the real battle had only just begun. As the city's bright lights blurred past him, Mark's mind was consumed by one thought. Karen wasn't finished. She had played this game too perfectly, and he had no doubt she would stop at nothing to see it through to the end. He had gained a small victory tonight, but it was only a small piece of the puzzle. There were bigger stakes at play, and he couldn't afford to let his guard down. His phone buzzed, and for a moment, the thought of ignoring it crossed his mind. But curiosity, anxiety, pushed him to pick it up. The screen flashed with an unknown number, the familiar feeling of dread creeping up his spine. He answered. "Who is this?" The voice on the other end was cold, calculating, and unmistakable. "Mark, it's Karen," she said, her voice smooth like velvet. "I hope you're enjoying your brief moment of victory, but you should know, it's not over yet." Mark's stomach dropped, the familiar surge of anger and frustration rising within him. He had known this was coming. "What do you want now, Karen?" he asked, his voice barely holding steady as the car swerved around another corner. "Oh, I think you know," she replied. "I'm going to make you an offer, Mark. You can walk away, leave the game behind, and we can pretend like none of this ever happened. You can go back to your life, but only if you give up your fight. If you do, I'll let you go free." The words burned in his ears. He could hear the cruel amusement in her tone, the twisted satisfaction of someone who believed they were in control. For a moment, he hesitated. The offer sounded tempting, too tempting. It was everything he wanted: peace, safety, freedom from the web Karen had trapped him in. But Mark's heart hardened as he slammed his foot down on the accelerator. There was no going back. Karen wasn't playing by the rules, and neither would he. "No deal," he spat, his voice unwavering. "You've already taken too much from me. I won't let you win. Not like this." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mark could feel the silence hanging there, thick with the tension of a final confrontation. Finally, Karen spoke, her voice colder than before. "You're making a mistake, Mark. But I suppose that's what makes this so interesting." And then the call ended. Mark tossed his phone into the passenger seat, his thoughts swirling with the uncertainty of what was to come. He was playing a dangerous game now, one that could destroy everything he had left. But there was no choice. His pride, his freedom, everything he had fought for, was worth more than giving in to her. Suddenly, his headlights flickered in the rearview mirror. Mark's heart skipped a beat as a dark SUV appeared out of nowhere, its powerful engine roaring as it surged toward him. He could see the silhouette of the vehicle gaining on him, the shadow of Karen's influence reaching out once again. He wasn't just running from the past anymore. He was being hunted. His grip tightened on the wheel. His mind raced for a plan, but there was no time left. The SUV was closing in, and there was only one thing left for him to do. Mark turned sharply down a narrow alley, the tires screeching as he cut through the darkened streets. His car jolted over the uneven pavement, the narrow space forcing him to take dangerous turns at breakneck speed. The SUV followed, its engine thundering behind him like a predator in pursuit of its prey. Mark's pulse thundered in his ears, the world outside a blur of shadows and headlights. He needed a way out, a place to lose them. But the city felt like a maze, every turn offering a new challenge, every corner bringing him closer to a dead end. Suddenly, he saw it, a small bridge ahead, its narrow path barely wide enough for his car. He had only one chance to shake them off, to escape the clutches of Karen's reach. With a sharp turn of the wheel, Mark shot across the bridge, the SUV too slow to follow. The sound of their tires screeching in frustration echoed behind him, but he didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. In the distance, the familiar glow of his neighborhood loomed, a symbol of safety, of victory. But as Mark's car sped toward the safety of home, one thing was clear: Karen's game wasn't over. It was just beginning. And no matter how fast he ran, he knew she'd be waiting. The final confrontation was yet to come. But Mark was ready. He had no choice now but to fight. Until the very end.